Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is, what the hell is it? I don't even know. It's Friday. Yeah. Hey, everybody. It's Friday. Terrific. We have a couple of days off coming to us. Fantastic. Oh, and it's MLK weekend as well. So we have 3 days coming to us. I guess, unless you're going to protest it because you're a racist and you're going to go to work. I mean, I guess you could try and do that. I don't recommend it. Racism sucks. You should try and avoid it whenever you can. But I realize that some of you, it may be, well, none of you, obviously, because you're here. But maybe people you run into in everyday life really don't understand this stuff. Anyway, it is Friday, January 17th, 2020, heading into the long weekend, and we'll catch up on what's going on. The president apparently continues to tweet. I don't really know why I am going to spend any time correcting this, but I guess he got wind of Alan Dershowitz on, I guess he was probably on television, giving him an excuse for, or, you know, something to say, I guess, about the GAO letter that we read about the other day, the conclusion that the GAO came to about his having broken the law with respect to the withholding of the Ukraine aid. And he wanted to blurt that out, and of course he got it backwards and tweeted about the GOA policy, which is not a thing, but okay, maybe just a typo. And Dershowitz, offering his regular, I guess, idea of cleverness, insists that the president tell everybody that we all got it backwards. The GAO got their own mission backwards, and they don't really understand the way policy differences are expressed in the federal government. But I guess, really, let me put it to you this way. Even without explaining what happened, and I will explain what happened and why it's wrong to say what he said and what Dershowitz said. But even without explaining what happened, if you were to ask pretty much anybody in the world and they were to be honest about it, I guess that leaves out Trump supporters in this, but if you were to ask them which of these two people, let's say two entities, do you believe knows better how the federal government actually works? Donald Trump, you know, and at this point you say, or a sea monkey, or a brick, or something that needs 15 flushes to go down the toilet, or whatever it is, you pretty much, you know the answer. But what if the other proposition was someone who works for the United States government's General Accounting Office, and you said to them, not only is it a question of how the government works, but it's how government accounting works. What would you think? And I think you'd probably choose the right answer. It's the GAO. They have this one correct. But of course, you know, Alan Dershowitz, I'll say this. He still has this much in common with other lawyers. It's fun and interesting to be counterintuitive and to be the one that proposes the theory that stands everything on its head. And I guess, you know, you imagine everyone will say, oh, now I've finally, Professor Dershowitz has explained it to me. And, you know, he's got the germ of an idea there. It just is inapplicable to this particular situation. He's got it. He himself has got it backwards. Should we just launch right into it? I don't know. It's a thing to do. Daily Coast Radio is live now, and that's what we do on the show. So maybe that's where we'll go. Unless Bill says we go elsewhere. Let's see. Kagro X, that's me. I'll figure out what I'm going to do. Recaps the 101 ways Trump has made this the greatest infrastructure week in American history. Oh, I forgot that it was one. And that includes President Kohler, the one flush toilet president. Yeah. I guess we're back on that topic. By the way, maybe I can borrow the fantastic video that I saw. I guess the guy has copyright in the video, and he could get all upset about our playing his music on the air, possibly. But I have a feeling that he would want it, let's say, disseminated as widely as possible. But there's I don't know. You know what? Honestly, the music alone doesn't do it justice completely. It's a very well edited video, and let me see. I'm going to scroll down so that we can find it. And at the very least, even if we don't play it on the air or only play part of it on the air, I want to give proper credit to the person who created it. I wasn't really thinking about playing this on the air, but it just sort of popped into my head as I was reading about, what Bill had said about he's still on the flush toilet thing. I guess that came up at his, was it Minneapolis rally the other day? He seems to think he's really resonating with people complaining about having to flush the toilet 15 times, and I just don't know anybody who has that problem. I guess I run into people who say, that their toilets don't work as well as they want, and they maybe have to flush twice, but 15 times. But I assume they all dismiss that as hyperbole. I don't know. Anyway, here we are. Nick Lutsko, Lutsko, Let's Go. I don't know how we would pronounce it. Lutsko is apparently is the artist here, and he's a musician, and I guess look at this, a contributor to College Humor, which I thought I saw the other day they were having some sort of problems and we're going to fire everybody or whatever, but I hope not. But Nick Lutsko is a musician with like legit music albums out there and everything. And one of his pastimes is putting his musical and I guess video editing talents to work. I don't know whether anybody else is doing the video editing, but with not song parodies, but political songs here's what I've seen. Can I explain it this way? He takes actual Trump speech text and Twitter text and sets it to music, and he sings it himself. Nick does. It's not like I've seen other people, auto-tuning and changing the pitch and timing on Trump's own audio of himself speaking, but this is different. But basically what he's saying is Trump spends so much of his time whining and moaning and complaining about things. And it's a great observation. And I did see somebody else making this observation on Twitter the other day saying, I don't understand why people aren't catching on that he's not this tough guy, achiever, alpha male. He's a whining baby. He spends all of his time blaming everybody else for the fact that he can't do anything. And, he likes nothing better than his grievances and to cry about how he can't overcome these grievances. Anyway, Nick realizes that there's something to this. And if you take his bitter complaint stuff, you can turn it into what they called back in the olden days in the movie Clueless, which was on TV last night. So that's why I'm reminded of it, as complaint rock, or what we, I guess, in more modern parlance call emo stuff. Emo. So he's created emo Trump with these songs, and this clip is emo Trump versus toilets. And the music is like legitimately good, and the people are flushing. Here we are. As you can see, this is going to come up in just a second. All right, it's cued nicely, but the music is good. The pacing is good, and it really clicks when you see the video as well, because it's edited very nicely, and all the motions that Trump makes in delivering these lines are very perfectly, syncopated with the beat of the music. But you get this idea of what he's doing here. Let me play a little bit of it.
People are flushing toilets 10 times, 15 times. Not me, of course, not me, but you. So you're in there 5 times longer than you're supposed to be. I call the guy, something wrong with this. No sir, it's you. I'm talking about 9 inches. It's a very unpleasant experience. Isn't it an elegant Trump with the toilets flushing 10 times? 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I'm not eating Oreos anymore.
Disgusting. I don't want to talk about it. No, it's too disgusting.
I mean, that's really, I'm just going to go on in a loop, of course, but I thought that was fantastic, and it was just beautifully done, and you should absolutely take a look at it, and I tweeted it around yesterday, and I guess I'll put it in the roundup today for you to take a look at. The music, like I said, the music's legit, and I love, there's so much I love about this, and we can stop it along the way and point all those things out. There's the lyrics, of course, if you didn't get them, although I think he delivers them very clearly, are in subtitles, I guess, along the way as we're watching this. But there's so many things I do love about this. Like,
people are flushing toilets 10 times, 15 times.
I thought that was really good. He captures the angst of Trump in delivering this line 10 times, 15 times. I like the way he does that. This is also all the way through illustrated by additional clips of video of Trump devouring his favorite fast food stuff. And if you wonder why people are flushing toilets 10 times, 15 times, it's because of your diet, sir. And then, anyway, and then I like this part too. This is also very classically Trump. This is now a cut to the rally at which he's complaining about the toilets, right? 10 times, 15 times.
Not me, of course, not me, but you.
That whole thing right there. That one, of course, the nod to Trump's accent, of course. Not, but I missed the way that he delivered this at whatever rally this is. I think this is an earlier one, but isn't that interesting? People are flushing the toilet 10, 15 times, and then he realizes, well, what does this say about me? Not me. You. Who? You? The rally goers? But we know this because he has a distinct loathing for his rally goers who he pretends he loves and who pretend they love him. Very weird relationship.
So you're in there 5 times longer than you're supposed to be. I call the guy, something wrong with this. No, sir, it's you.
That's another interesting little snippet. So I guess that's his experience, or his made-up experience with calling the plumber. Is there something wrong with this toilet? No, sir, it's you. Oh, okay. Well, that answers the question, I guess, in a way. I've called a toilet expert, plumber. He says there's nothing wrong with this. It's me. So my whole complaint is undermined. I don't know, but I guess he's making fun of that and supposedly saying there's a worldwide conspiracy, not only among toilet makers, but among toilet repairers to lay the blame for this on you. Now, the next part, of course, is where it gets a little dicey.
I'm talking about 9 inches. It's a very unpleasant experience. Isn't it an elegant Trump with the toilets flushing 10 times?
I think we'll just stop it there. And then, so I guess what he's talking about, and isn't it an elegant? It's a very unpleasant experience. 9 inches. He's making the hand gesture, although who knows whether he's actually talking about that at the time that this hand gesture is grabbed from. But is that supposed to be like what? I mean, I'm guessing he's talking about using the bathroom and having to flush, and we imagine that this is problematic for him because of, well, it's a morning show. I mean, I don't want to get too close into it, but there's something that he's describing as being, 9 inches, I guess, which he's trying to flush down the toilet, which I guess he's talking about taking a crap. And I mean, what a thing to say. Isn't it an elegant? As the President of the United States, ladies and gentlemen, he's describing the size of his bowel movements at a public rally. But something, tan suits, jeans, sat on the Resolute desk, embarrassing the office, etc., etc. I don't know what to tell you. So that's where we are with that one. And then, of course, it ends up, well, we can stop playing it at this point. It finishes with the shot of him walking up the stairs to the airplane. I love those stairs. I root for those stairs every time. I haven't seen them win yet. I'm still waiting. But marching up the stairs to Air Force One with the toilet paper on his shoe, which also, once again, I mean, how is that not a tan suit moment for everybody? Anyway, there we are. So congratulations to me for having heard that song. That's really how I feel about it. I feel like I won. But if you want to credit somebody for it, credit Nick Lutzko. You can find him on Twitter, surprisingly enough, as Nick Lutzko, which is terrific. Makes it very easy. And on YouTube as well. And it's all featured there. And he's got a whole channel of his emo Trump songs, setting his angry tweets to music as well. This, though, I think is but I don't know, because maybe I heard it first. This is The Capper. I really love this one. It's fantastic. This is probably my new favorite political music video of the moment, and I don't see that many of them, so the champions are long reigning. I think before this one, I would say my favorite one and best executed one before this goes back to what, like the 2000, I don't know, when? 2008, 2010 maybe? It must have been like 2010 to 12 area, when somebody set the George Michael song to music. What was it? Freedom. And I don't know. I really love that one. And that's, I mean, I could play that for you, but it's just the music. But the video is great. And then I guess before that, that displaced the George Washington cartoon video of what the weird kind of almost rap about George Washington being a superhero of some kind. Anyway, let's see. Yeah, who knows what it's really all about. Ray, let's see. Justice has some theories about this. Maybe it has to do with Matt Whitaker and his weird big dick toilet. I don't think so. But who knows? Maybe. I have no idea what to tell you. Oh, look at this. I have all kinds of suggestions. Everyone loves the toilet thing. That's probably among Trump's greatest hits. And maybe he's right in bringing that up at rallies. People really seem to love it. All right, what do we got here? Let's see. Mike Musson says, with his weak toilet flush obsession, I guess we can add rampant constipation to Trump's medical problems. Probably true. I don't know. I really don't know exactly what he's... I guess there are low, whatever it is, low capacity flush toilets that, here's what I think is probably happening is he's probably installing those to save on water bills at his clubs, and then people are complaining to him that they don't work. That may be it. And I'm sure he puts in, power flushing equipment in his own apartments, but I don't know. It's just a guess out of the blue. Let's see. Jack Ox has something here to contribute, pointing me to Alternate, who says, Royal Flush, the power of Donald Trump's toilet politics. I was actually trying to put a real explanation to all of this. I don't even know if I care, really. I just love that he's talking about toilets and looking like an idiot. Let's see. Alternate. Well, it's Chauncey DeVega writing here for Salon, aggregated, I guess, in Alternate. And I don't know. Do we? It's not that I don't care to find out what's at the bottom of all of it. Well, just speaking metaphorically, but I do think there are more important things, and perhaps I've spent enough time talking about the toilet thing. I'll read this one. I'll share it with all of you. It's a good bet that it's worth your time to read, but I would say, I don't know. At this point, I'm going to guess bad bet that it's more important to you to have me read it to you than for you to be able to find it and listen to it or read it and spend our time elsewhere. Okay, so let's see. The other obsession of the morning was, like I said, I guess more substantive obsession from this morning was Trump complaint tweeting the prompting he got from Alan Dershowitz. So I'll take a look at that one before turning to the rest of the stories of the day. The tweet thread, it's a short thread, says the GOA... This is actually quite hilarious now that I look at it in writing. The GOA got it exactly backwards, he starts out saying. It's a quote from Dershowitz. But the GOA got it exactly backwards, which is hilarious all by itself because, of course, you just got the acronym exactly backwards. It's GAO. Now, who got it exactly backwards? So he says, or he thinks he's saying the GAO got it exactly backwards. Here's what they said, says Dershowitz. He's quoting Dershowitz from the Telly. The law does not permit the president to substitute his own policy priorities to those Congress has enacted into law. It's exactly the opposite. The Constitution does not allow Congress to substitute its own priorities for the foreign policy of the president. This according to Alan Dershowitz with Sean Hannity on Fox News. And then it says, they do what the House asks. The swamp, he adds in at the end of that. So, now we got to decipher, all right, the part of it that isn't Dershowitz, we can't even tell what he's trying to say. I think what he means here, they do what the House wants, is that the GAO is, I was going to say, he's accusing them of being an arm of the Congress, and I'm not certain that is entirely true, but it might very well be that it is originally the creation of the Congress. Let's go take a look. I know they changed the name of it at some point too. From it was the General Accounting Office, and then they changed it to the Government Accountability Office. I think that was like a Republican swap for the one of the renaming stunts that they pulled along the way, and then we just never undid it. Anyway, so let's see what the original provenance of the GAO was. It's a legislative branch government agency that provides auditing, evaluation, and investigative services for the United States Congress. So a little bit like the CBO in that sense, Congressional Budget Office. And it's a traditional trick for presidents of all stripes when they have disputes about budgeting or how to account for something in the budget. The CBO versus the OMB, which is the White House arm, the Office of Management and Budget, and the Congressional Budget Office, they sometimes, or their principals occasionally square off against one another when they don't have the same estimates. So the GAO is an arm of the legislative branch, and so that's what Trump is talking about. He's kind of got that right. But the idea that they simply, make stuff up about anything. But, okay, whatever. What he's trying to insinuate here is that this is a legislative branch arm, and it might be expected that they would take the side of the legislative branch and all this. What Dershowitz is trying to say here, of course, is that the president has the ultimate power when it comes to determining the foreign policy of the United States. And that is at least partially true, if not entirely true. What he's doing here, of course, is obfuscating as between the foreign policy of the United States and the appropriations policy and powers in the United States, which do, in fact, lie with Congress, according to the Constitution. And because the money was going to be spent in foreign aid, Dershowitz puts that under the heading of foreign policy as opposed to appropriations policy, which is what it is. And I mean, it's confusing because it's being spent abroad and used as foreign aid, and foreign aid is part of our foreign policy. True. There's room for dispute, and there is. And here's the thing. Here's where the room for dispute is. It's Congress that has the power to spend that money, and it's the president that has the power to determine what the foreign policy priorities, as a matter of policy, are for the government of the United States. And to the extent that the foreign policy of the United States requires either the expenditure of federal funds or the withholding of federal funds, the president can weigh in on those things. And there's a process for doing it. Now, how do you tell the difference? It's hard to tell the difference between money that's spent on foreign aid. Is it foreign policy or is it money spending? Is it purse strings? Well, it's a little bit of both. And where they overlap, there's a policy, there's a procedure and a process for settling those disputes. And here's what Dershowitz is very purposefully leaving out. When there is a genuine policy dispute between the president and the Congress, there are very clearly demarcated grounds on which those policy differences are hashed out. One thing that is not part of a true policy dispute, as between two branches of government, is secrecy. That's how you can tell. I tweeted just before going on the air this morning, how can you tell the difference between a genuine policy dispute and BS cover-up as I was saying, how did I say it? How do you tell the difference between a genuine policy dispute between the president and Congress and a BS, I said the whole word, cover up for power grabbing, grift, and extortion? And the answer is our favorite stuff here, process and procedure. Real policy disputes of any kind, whether intergovernmental or among two people about anything. Real policy disputes aren't, because they can't be. They aren't carried out in secret and without notice to the other party. That's just a grudge or stealing or whatever, backstabbing. It's not a real policy dispute between branches of government. To the extent that the president feels that the foreign policy of the United States absolutely requires the withholding of duly appropriated foreign aid, there is a process for letting those objections be known. And it begins this way as the Congress begins considering appropriating foreign aid. They have hearings, and they're public, and witnesses are invited on behalf of the executive branch to deliver that message. The president feels that foreign aid to this country at this time would be inappropriate because foreign policy position. And if it doesn't work, and you can't convince Congress, and they want to substitute their judgment, your opportunity is in the veto stage. I am so certain that this is in violation of what I say our foreign policy priorities have to be that I veto the spending legislation. Don't want to get that dramatic about it. There are other things you can do. Some of them more controversial than others. Some of you may remember from the old George W. Bush days, and they continued into the Obama days, and I imagine they continue now, signing statements. They're controversial, and I would disagree with their ability to execute this as policy, but you can try it. Trump never did. You simply say, hey, look, I'm signing this bill. I'm okay with this bill, but this particular item, I reserve the right to say no to. It's unconstitutional, but... Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, and I've learned that I either need to update these announcements more often or stop saying that the announcements are brand new. What's not new is that this message, too, is a call for your support in keeping the Kagro in the Morning show on the air. My thanks go out to all of you who do support the show through your donations. The stats say that Kagro in the Morning fans download our program about 2,000 times each weekday. But our donors make up only about 8% of our daily listeners. Patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple to make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. If we're helping keep you sane during the Trump era, consider what that's worth. $1 a day? 50 cents? One thin dime? We do about 20 shows a month, so pick a number, do the math, and head to patreon.com/KagroX to let us know. Thanks again, everyone, for all your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning show here on Netroots Radio. It may have sounded like we cut out for our little break right in the middle of my sentence, but I actually did intentionally end it right there, and I hope every word of that made it on. Maybe we lost that last word too, but I did say that those signing statements, well, to enforce them as though they were really, that they really carried the force of law is unconstitutional, but, and I just stopped there, but who cares is essentially what I was saying. We had that fight in the George W. Bush administration, and nobody wanted to do anything about it. So the next administration just took advantage of them, not at the same rate, not at the same volume, and not as brazenly necessarily in all cases as the George W. Bush administration did. But that's just one of those things where power is left on the table. You don't check it, then that's that. It's just left there as a gloss on power, and it's assumed that Congress has no objection because they recognize no objection, and the next administration will just do the same. Does everybody remember what those signing statements were? They were essentially when you would sign legislation, that is, decline to veto it and instead say this meets with my approval and it becomes the law of the land. Occasionally, presidents, even before George W. Bush, they didn't invent them. But the presidents would say, in addition to signing this legislation, I'm also going to give you a statement about it. And it usually was something, it got to be as straightforward as, I'm signing this legislation. This does have the force of law. All this money in here should be spent with the exception of this, and it doesn't have to be money. It can be any provision of law. Exception of this provision, which I claim, and the idea was you would ordinarily have to say, the reason I dispute this and the reason I will direct the executive branch not to faithfully execute this part of the law, which would otherwise put me in violation of my oath and be an impeachable offense in a real world, is that I think that it is unconstitutional to do this for whatever reason, either because it's unconstitutional to force me as the president to do this thing, or this money is improperly being spent, or I have a constitutional prerogative of some kind that I think I'm exercising. But the idea of the signing statement is that you are putting it out there in public on notice. I'm saying that I think that there's a genuine contest we could be having here in the, up to before the Supreme Court as to who's right here, me or you. And I'm declaring it outright. And if you want to sue me about it, I'm here. You know where to find me. I guess you could impeach me over it, but I will dispute that. Well, before we get around to an impeachment trial, we'll probably have this fight and we'll lay out our differences. And you'll say, we have the power of the purse. And I'll say, yes, I understand that. And I didn't want to get in the way of that. But you're spending money in a way that I believe is unconstitutional. Let's go to court and see what the Supreme Court has to say about it. And although nobody really necessarily believed that George W. Bush would have gone into it with this in mind, he probably in the end would have said, well, if we go to the Supreme Court and I lose, then I lose. Okay, I can live with it. Trump, of course, would refuse to live with it. And the real problem is, of course, that he's so certain that he's right or so certain that he wouldn't live by the dictates of the Supreme Court if they said he was wrong, that he just skips all of that. And that's the issue. First, you can go to the committees and say, I don't want any money spent in Ukraine because I think they're hopelessly corrupt. And you try to make your case. And if the Congress doesn't believe, if the House doesn't believe you, you try with the Senate. If the Senate doesn't believe you, and both the House and the Senate together appropriate this money, you could consider vetoing the legislation if you feel that strongly about it. If you don't, or you think it won't work, or you think there'll be a veto override and you're going to lose politically by doing something like this, you try the signing statement. You then direct the OMB. At that point, you can direct the OMB and say, look, I object to this. I've made this signing statement. I believe I have a constitutional prerogative here that allows me to stand in the way of this otherwise duly appropriated money, and we're going to hash this out. And the law even does contemplate opportunities for the president, even at this late stage, even having rejected the opportunity to speak to the House subcommittee, the House full committee. And by this I mean also there are several. You could speak to the House Foreign Affairs subcommittee that's responsible for Ukraine. I forget what, Europe, and I don't know. I forget. Should we look it up? Do we care about these things, this kind of detail? Let's just take a quick look so we know what we're talking about. Teach a little procedure here because you want to do some lobbying. House Foreign Affairs Committee. And let's go over to their website and then look at their subcommittees. And they got an Africa, Global Health, Global Human Rights, and International Organizations subcommittee. Asia, the Pacific, and Non-Proliferation subcommittee. Everybody gets a geographical area and then some issue areas thrown in there. The one you would need to speak to about Ukraine would be Europe, Eurasia, Energy, and the Environment, which is an interesting combination because it's the 4 E's, if you will. Another one, the Middle East, North Africa, and International Terrorism. Gee whiz, I can't believe that pairing. Oversight and investigations, of course, because you always want to have one of those. And many committees have an oversight and investigations subcommittee in addition to the oversight committee itself, the full committee. And then there's a Western Hemisphere Civilian Security and Trade subcommittee. So I guess these are in alphabetical order. So here's what you could do. You object to this thing. You go to the Europe, Eurasia, Energy, and the Environment subcommittee, which is marking up legislation authorizing foreign aid in this area, Europe, Eurasia, and say, I don't think Ukraine should get any money. They overrule you and they say, we think it should. You go to the full committee when they mark up what the subcommittee has sent them and say, again, I strenuously object, to borrow the phrase, to aid to Ukraine. And the full committee says, to hell with you, we don't care. You have the opportunity to go over to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Do the same thing at their subcommittee. Do the same thing at their full committee. Now, at this point, both the subcommittees in the House and the Senate and the full committees in the House and Senate have said, we disagree with you. We're going to give foreign aid. We're going to authorize foreign aid to Ukraine. At which point, all of this then moves over to the Appropriations Committee. So we go over to the Appropriations Committee, and let's see, House Appropriations. Again, I guess we don't really necessarily need to know all of this, but we'll go over to the House Appropriations Committee. We look on their directory for the subcommittees, and there are a lot more. I don't know if I'll read all of them, but we need foreign aid is what we're talking about. Well, let's see. Will we find it in this one? Agriculture, Rural Development, Food and Drug Administration, and related agencies. Nope. How about Commerce, Justice, Science, and related agencies? No, probably not. Defense. Well, remember that some of this aid is running through the State Department, just pure foreign aid, and some of it is military aid. It's defense aid. So in this case, yes, we want to talk to the Defense Appropriations Subcommittee. And also, by the way, remember that this gives us an opportunity. We should be going back. We should have done this earlier. Talk to the House Armed Services Committee about foreign military aid. The subcommittee of jurisdiction, and in the full committee, same thing in the Senate. So let's say that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different places we could have intervened. Now on the Appropriations Committee, there's the Defense Subcommittee on both sides, so that's 10 different entities we could be talking to. Energy and Water Development and related agencies, probably not. Financial Services and General Government, nah, that's probably not it. Homeland Security, no. Interior, Environment and related agencies, that isn't it. Labor, Health and Human Services, Education and related agencies, no. Legislative Branch, no. Military Construction, Veterans Affairs and related agencies, not really. Military, you think, right? But no, military construction, that's kind of different. It's its own thing. State, Foreign Operations and related programs. That's the one we got to talk to. We're up to 10. This is 11. There's one on the Senate side. That's 12. And then there's finally the last subcommittee, Transportation, Housing and Urban Development and related agencies. So no. All right. So at the subcommittee level with the appropriations, that's 12. Then the full Appropriations Committee are 13 and 14. There are 14 inflection points at which we can intervene just in the committee process to try to register objections to the rampant corruption that we have always believed was pervasive in Ukraine and reason to stop aid to them. Donald Trump takes advantage of 0 of those. Next, of course, the bills come to the floor, both the authorization bills from the Foreign Affairs Committee comes to the House floor. That's 15. And then it happens in the Senate. That's 16. Now, sometimes these things are lumped together, but not the authorization bills. They're not generally done individually. But the appropriations bills are sometimes lumped together, but under regular order, which we almost never see. There's an appropriations bill separately for these things. But there were 2. There's a Defense Appropriations Bill, and then there's a State Department Appropriations Bill. So we got, let's see, we were 14, 15, 16 was the Foreign Affairs Authorization Bill. The Defense Authorization Bill is going to have that too. So 17, 18. And then the, I guess that's it for the appropriations, right? So, okay, what are we saying? There's something like 18 to 20 different places in which this objection you could expect to be registered in a legitimate policy dispute. Instead, there are 0. And then, once the bill is passed, you might expect to have either a veto fight or a signing statement. So we're in the neighborhood of the 21st or so opportunity to say something. And that doesn't happen. Then there is the orders to the OMB. If you only realize this after the fact, although I guess if you lose your fights all the way up to here, you might still try and intervene and say, there should at least be a temporary hold while we can investigate whether or not all of this complaining I'm doing, either now or all along the way, is legitimate. One last stop. So, like I'm saying, I guess what we're saying here is there's 20 plus opportunities to register a legitimate objection. And again, at the bottom of all this, there's a definitional problem. You can't have a policy dispute as between the executive branch and the legislative branch without telling the legislative branch that you're in a dispute. I mean, that's just plain logic. You're not having a dispute if you don't dispute it with anybody. That's just secretly sneaking around at the end and trying to undo an appropriation. So, of course, Dershowitz doesn't give any thought to this. He doesn't care. It's a knee-jerk position. Defend the president. I'll get on television. But it's extraordinarily weak as an argument, and I think we've demonstrated that pretty amply here. So if you get in a fight about that over the weekend, you should be able to roll right over that one. If you have a genuine policy dispute, long story short, you got to say so at some point to the people you're supposedly disputing with so that they can answer you. And that's the part that they left out. They did all of this in secret, and they did everything they could, and now we have all these emails that show that they're doing everything they can to hide the fact that they're disputing this to the last possible moment. And then when it can no longer be hidden from the other branches of government, and not even from the other branches, it can't even be hidden from he's hiding it from the executive branch of government. He's telling the Pentagon and the State Department nothing about what's going on. And they're expecting this money to be spent because to this point, the dispute, such as it is entirely secret and contained entirely to the White House and OMB and their operation. They're not telling anybody that they're having this dispute. And then when it finally breaks out into what we would consider to be the open as among the government operators here, they're still attempting to hide it from the Ukrainians, still attempting to hide it from Congress. But, the big problem with all of this is if you're going to have a fight over who gets to call the shots in foreign policy as between Congress and the White House, and I guess maybe Dershowitz would say, well, there is no dispute, and there ought not to be any dispute. It belongs entirely in the hands of the president. And again, here's where he obfuscates. If the foreign policy of the United States is that Ukraine is hopelessly corrupt, that's one thing. If the appropriations policy of Congress is that either regardless of the corruption or in the absence of any notice given to Congress of the belief that there is corruption, the appropriations policy of the country is this. We don't give all the power to one side or the other. That's the actual constitutional structure, that there are always places that one branch can overlap with another and provide what we all learned in grade school was a check and or balance against the other side. For Dershowitz to say that it's his belief that the constitutional order makes the president both the first and last word in all things pertaining to foreign policy, including the spending of money on foreign policy and in pursuit of foreign policy, is what's exactly backwards. It has nothing to do with any understanding any American, well-educated or otherwise, has about how our government works. It's almost never, in any case, down to one person and one person only to make the final and full determination for all time, subject to interpretation by no one, with respect to any part of official policy of the United States of America, ever. It's never happened and never should. To the extent that you want it to, you are a fascist authoritarian idiot. Thank you. and good night. And I hope you have to flush 15, 20, 30 times tonight. Alan Dershowitz. I don't even know how many times you would have to flush to get Alan Dershowitz down the toilet, but let's give it some thought. All right. That's the, maybe that'll be the political science lesson for the first half of the show. There'll probably be another one before we end up. Let's see. More excerpts from this book, A Very Stable Genius, Donald J. Trump's Testing of America, one of the signs of our times, I guess, at this point, is that if you are a journalist working for, let's say, hypothetically, the Washington Post, and let's say your name, hypothetically, is, I don't know, Laurel D. Koenig, or perhaps Carol D. Leonig, and Rilip Pucker. I don't know. It doesn't matter. But this is a very modern phenomenon. These two guys, and they're not both guys, Carol's not, but, you know, I say colloquially, these two reporters, fine reporters, are on the beat for the Washington Post, and it's very interesting, the dynamics we have here, and I don't know whether it has anything to do with legal protection or whatever. They're on the beat, they're covering George they're covering that, George W. Bush probably also, but who knows whether their career goes back. I meant to say Donald Trump. They're covering that other horrible Republican president, and they could be reporting this at any time. But they didn't. Except now they did. You see, what I'm getting at here is the modern phenomenon of reporters coming to know these things and then not sharing them with us in exchange for their regular salary over at the Washington Post, even though the Washington Post, by all accounts, is a newspaper. And this is news. And you can tell that they think it is worthy news because they're printing it now. But they're only printing it as excerpts from the book. I don't really know why this is. But this has been happening a lot lately. With the Washington Post, the New York Times, everybody. It's very weird. And I feel like if you found that out because you were reporting, then, you know, tell us. And be happy to get your reporter's salary. But, you know, they're going to have a payday with the book. And what's the difference anyway? Because the Washington Post will get the scoop. They'll get the first excerpts of the book. So the Washington Post's pages will report this fantastic reporting and news earlier than anyone else. It's an exclusive. So in the end, what's the difference? And it's a great way for, I don't know, maybe the Washington Post even has a part of the publishing deal and they get an extra cut. I don't know. This monetizing this whole thing. It seems weird to me. I feel like you should have told me this earlier, since you knew it earlier, but you were waiting for a book. But then they say, what's the difference? I told you. But, you know, and you didn't even have to, well, I don't want to have to pay extra for the book. Well, you don't. We excerpted it here in the pages of the Washington Post. It's free just like everything else. Yeah, but why didn't you tell me last year when you found out? I mean, we're in the middle of impeaching this guy for being an incompetent, insane jackass who has no regard for anything. Could be useful information. Well, here it is. You're right in the middle of the impeachment trial. I'm giving it to you. Yeah, but don't you think we could have developed this earlier? But it's not the responsibility of the reporters to do that work for the Congress, which is, you know, doing the heavy lifting in the impeachment. But anyway, it's a complaint I have. Nonetheless, I'm glad to have the information. Today's excerpts, I didn't get to read yesterday's excerpt. I'm going to go back and find this out. I almost makes me want to buy this book, except for the fact that eventually all the juiciest stuff will just be digested by others and printed for free in the paper, and I'll get to it. I just said I wanted it earlier, but it only really matters if I am a member of Congress or a staffer trying to actually impeach the president. As a bystander, I will read it at my leisure, I suppose, and for free. But today's excerpts are very interesting. Under the headline, "You're a bunch of dopes and babies," inside Trump's stunning tirade against generals. That's an interesting thing to say about anybody, really, but generals in particular, and they seem to think so too. Right here at the top, "There is no more sacred room for military officers than 2E924. I don't know how they say that. There's probably lingo, but that's the way it reads to me. 2E924 of the Pentagon. That's, I guess 2E is like, what, second ring and E floor and number 920. They got a whole code to finding a way around the biggest office building or whatever. Is it still the biggest office building? Anyway, no more sacred room for these military officers than 2E924 in the Pentagon, a windowless and secure vault where the Joint Chiefs of Staff meet regularly to wrestle with classified matters. Its more common name is the Tank. The Tank resembles a small corporate boardroom with a gleaming golden oak table, leather swivel armchairs, and other mid-century stylings. Inside its walls, flag officers observe a reverence and decorum for the wrenching decisions that have been made there. Hanging prominently on one of the walls is The Peacemakers, a painting that depicts an 1865 Civil War strategy session with Abraham Lincoln and his 3 service chiefs, Lieutenant General Ulysses S. Grant, Major General William Tecumseh Sherman, and Rear Admiral David Dixon Porter. 152 years after Lincoln hatched the plans to preserve the Union, President Trump's advisors staged an intervention inside the tank to try and preserve the world order. By that point, 6 months into his administration, and again, don't you think we ought to have known this? 6 months into his administration, Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis, Director of the National Economic Council Gary Cohn, and Secretary of State Rex Tillerson had grown alarmed by gaping holes in Trump's knowledge of history, especially the key alliances forged following World War II, which really is just growing up in the world around you and reading the newspaper from time to time if you are 70-something years old. Trump had dismissed allies as worthless, cozied up to authoritarian regimes in Russia and elsewhere, and advocated withdrawing troops from strategic outposts and active theaters alike. Just before we move on, one more observation here. The intervention team here is Jim Mattis, gone. Gary Cohn, gone. Rex Tillerson, gone. Bad intervention, fellas. Trump organized his unorthodox worldview under the simplistic banner of America First, but Mattis, Tillerson, and Cohn feared his proposals were rash, barely considered, and a danger to America's superpower standing. They also felt that many of Trump's impulsive ideas stemmed from his lack of familiarity with U.S. history and even where countries were located. To have a useful discussion with him, the trio agreed, they had to create a basic knowledge, a shared language. It's kind of basic. It's true. So, on July 20th, 2017, this is, again, 6 months into his administration as President of the United States, they decide he's got to learn to talk. He has to understand what's going on in the world. So Mattis invites Trump to the tank for what he, Tillerson, and Cohn had carefully organized as a tailored tutorial. What happened inside the tank that day crystallized the commander-in-chief's berating, derisive, and dismissive manner. Oh, they failed. Foreshadowing decisions such as the one earlier this month that brought the United States to the brink of war with Iran. The tank meeting was a turning point in Trump's presidency. Rather than getting him to appreciate America's traditional role in alliances, Trump began to tune out and eventually push away the experts who believed their duty was to protect the country by restraining his more dangerous impulses. Good job. The episode has been documented numerous times, but subsequent reporting reveals a more complete picture of the moment and the chilling effect Trump's comments and hostility had on the nation's military and national security leadership. I guess that paragraph, they just put that in there. It was a dig back at me for dinging them for not telling us this earlier and saving it for the book. They're telling me, we told you, and I think they might even be right about that. But they saved the juiciest stuff for their book. They just told us in bland, dry terms that the president was an utter buffoon and was going to fire everybody around him who knew anything about anything. Just before 10 a.m. on a scorching summer Thursday, this they wouldn't tell us until now, I guess. It was scorching out. Well, okay. That you could have left out of the newspaper reports. I agree with you on that one. Trump arrived at the Pentagon. He stepped out of his motorcade, walked along a corridor with portraits honoring former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, and stepped inside the tank. I'm surprised they didn't carry him in a sedan chair. The uniformed officers greeted their commander-in-chief. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, General Joseph F. Dunford Jr., sat in the seat of honor midway down the table because this was his room, and Trump sat at the head of the table facing a projection screen. Mattis and the newly confirmed Deputy Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan sat to the president's left, with Vice President Pence and Tillerson to his right. Down the table sat the leaders of the military branches along with Cohn and Treasury Secretary Stephen Mnuchin, for no reason. White House Chief Strategist Stephen K. Bannon, even worse, was on the outer ring of chairs with other staff, taking his seat just behind Mattis and directly in Trump's line of sight. Mattis, Cohn, and Tillerson and their aides decided to use maps, graphics, and charts to tutor the president, figuring they would help keep him from getting bored. Oh, that's nice. Mattis opened with a slideshow punctuated by lots of dollar signs. That's a good idea. Mattis devised the strategy to use terms the impatient president, schooled in real estate, would appreciate to impress upon him the value of U.S. investments abroad. He sought to explain why U.S. troops were deployed in so many regions and why America's safety hinged on a complex web of trade deals, alliances, and bases across the globe. An opening line flashed on the screen, setting the tone. The post-war international rules-based order is the greatest gift of the greatest generation. Let's read it just this way. Mattis then gave a 20-minute briefing, mistake, on the power of the NATO alliance to stabilize Europe and keep the United States safe. Bannon thought to himself, not good. Trump is not going to like that one bit. The internationalist language Mattis was using was a trigger for Trump, and you don't want to trigger that guy. Oh, baby, this is going to be effing wild, Bannon thought. If you stood up and threatened to shoot Trump, he couldn't say post-war rules-based international order. It's just not the way he thinks. And he's probably right in that respect. But, of course, that just means he shouldn't be president. Bannon was going to try and paper over this. All right, should we continue with this? I guess so. Our break is coming up. For the next 90 minutes, Mattis, Tillerson, and Cohn took turns trying to emphasize their points, pointing to the charts and diagrams. They showed where U.S. personnel were positioned at military bases, CIA stations, and embassies, and how U.S. deployments fended off the threats of terror cells, nuclear blasts, and destabilizing enemies in places including Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, the Korean Peninsula, and Syria. Cohn spoke for about 20 minutes about the value of free trade with America's allies, emphasizing how he saw each trade agreement working together as part of an overall structure to solidify U.S. economic and national security. We'll be right back with more. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. All right, let's continue on a little bit. This is a very, it's a long excerpt, of course. So even less of the book that you actually have to buy, I suppose, if you look at it that way. But we want to get to the part where he has his tantrum, finally. Trump appeared peeved by the schoolhouse vibe, but also allergic to the dynamic of his advisors talking at him. His ricocheting attention span led him to repeatedly interrupt the lesson. He heard an advisor say a word or phrase and then seized on that to interject with his take. For instance, the word base prompted him to launch in to say how crazy and stupid it was to pay for bases in some countries. Trump's first complaint was to repeat what he had vented about to his national security advisor months earlier. South Korea should pay for a $10 billion missile defense system that the United States built for it. The system was designed to shoot down any short and medium-range ballistic missiles from North Korea to protect South Korea and American troops stationed there. But Trump argued that the South Koreans should pay for it, proposing that the administration pull U.S. troops out of the region or bill the South Koreans for their protection. We should charge them rent, Trump said of South Korea. I think meaning what it means, I think. I mean, I get it. It's not an incorrect phrasing of it. But we should charge them rent for the missile system, I guess. We can't charge South Korea rent to be in South Korea. We don't own it. Although maybe he thinks that by virtue of the fact that our troops are there that we do. I don't know. I don't think it's quite that crazy. We should make them pay for our soldiers. We should make money off everything. Okay, so that's slightly different. We should be renting them our soldiers, like mercenaries. And you see that that's something that he is claiming to have done, or claiming to be doing right now with Saudi Arabia. And what are we, about a week now, almost past the point at which he claimed to Laura Ingraham that $1 billion had been just, quote, deposited in a bank somewhere, by way of Saudi Arabia paying for the presence of additional U.S. troops there in the wake of the escalation with Iran. And I think we still don't know whether that's true or not, or what account it would be in or not. I mean, there's a million things that could be possible here. It could be a total lie. They've spent nothing. It could be a partial lie that they said that they were going to pay $1 billion, which was bad in its own right, and then didn't pay it, which would also be bad in its own right. It also would be bad if they said they were going to pay it and they did pay it. It would be bad even if the money went into the Treasury. It would be even worse, of course, if the money went into Trump's private bank account. But we don't know anything about it because reasons, and we all have to focus on something else. There's just too much. It's a flood of information. We have to know whether Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are arguing with one another or not. So this is what we got to find out. Anyway, so that's it. We should charge them rent. We should make them pay for our soldiers. We should make money off of everything. I guess that's run the government like a business, after all, right? Trump proceeded to explain that NATO, too, was worthless. U.S. generals were letting the allied member countries get away with murder, he said, and they owed the United States a lot of money after not living up to their promise of paying their dues. They're in arrears, Trump said, reverting to the language of real estate. He lifted both his arms, and that must have sent his heart racing, but he lifted both his arms at his sides in frustration. Then he scolded top officials for the untold millions of dollars he believed they had let slip through their fingers by allowing allies to avoid their obligations. We are owed money you haven't been collecting, Trump told them. You would totally go bankrupt if you had to run your own business. Mattis wasn't trying to convince the president of anything, only to explain and provide facts. Now things were devolving quickly. Oh no, you tried to teach him something. Yeah, you're very dumb. The general tried to calmly explain to the president that he was not quite right. The NATO allies didn't owe the United States back rent, he said. The truth was more complicated. NATO had a non-binding goal that members should pay at least 2% of their gross domestic product on their defenses. Only 5 of the countries currently met that goal, but it wasn't as if they were shorting the United States on the bill. More broadly, Mattis argued, the NATO alliance was not only serving to protect Western Europe, it protected America too. This is what keeps us safe, Mattis said. Cohn tried to explain to Trump that he needed to see the value of the trade deals. These are commitments that help keep us safe, Cohn said. Bannon interjected. Stop, he said. All you guys talk about all these great things. They're all our partners. I want you to name me now one country and one company that's going to have his back. What does that even mean? I don't know. Trump then repeated a threat he'd made countless times before. He wanted out of the Iran nuclear deal that President Obama had struck in 2015, which called for Iran to reduce its uranium stockpile and cut its nuclear program. It's the worst deal in history, Trump declared. Well, actually, Tillerson interjected. Well, that's not going to go anywhere. But notice the transition we've made here. Bannon has his own agenda, but as he points out here, you guys say all these things. Name me one country and one company that's going to have his back, as though having his back had anything to do with anything. But so it's an absurd demand all by itself. But here's Bannon intervening and saying, here's how we'll get out of it. Name me one country and one company that's going to have his back. And Trump says, yeah. And then just goes, and Iran sucks too, and we should get out of that deal. What? I was saying something completely different. He can't even be on his own allies' side. Well, actually, Tillerson is interjecting about the worst deal in history. I don't want to hear it, Trump said, cutting off the Secretary of State before he could explain some of the benefits of the agreement. They're cheating. They're building. We're getting out of it. I keep telling you. I keep giving you time, and you keep delaying me. I want out of it. Before they could debate the Iran deal, Trump erupted to revive another frequent complaint. Toilets! No, not this time. The war in Afghanistan, which was now America's longest war. I've been flushing that war 10, 15 times. He demanded an explanation for why the United States hadn't won in Afghanistan yet, now 16 years after the nation began fighting there in the wake of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. I guess that's not a terrible question, right? Trump unleashed his disdain, calling Afghanistan a loser war. The phrase hung in the air and disgusted not only the military leaders at the table, but also the men and women in uniform sitting along the back wall behind their principals. They were all sworn to obey their commander-in-chief's commands, and here he was calling the war they'd been fighting a loser war. And, of course, I'm sure he would say that to all the veterans standing there with their amputated legs as he greets them and, Walter Reed. Yeah, you lost your leg in the lose war. I like people who get their legs amputated in winter wars. That's just me. You're all losers, Trump said. You don't know how to win anymore. Trump questioned why the United States couldn't get some oil as payment for the troops stationed in the Persian Gulf. We spent $7 trillion. They're ripping us off, Trump boomed. Where is the effing oil? All right. Trump seemed to be speaking up for the voters who elected him. That's very generous. And several attendees thought they heard Bannon in Trump's words. Bannon had been trying to persuade Trump to withdraw forces by telling him, the American people are saying, we can't spend $1 trillion a year on this. We just can't. It's going to bankrupt us. And not just that, the deplorables don't want their kids in the South China Sea at the 38th parallel or in Syria and Afghanistan in perpetuity, Bannon would add. Oh, he calls them deplorables too. Invoking Hillary Clinton's infamous basket of deplorables reference to Trump's supporters, Trump mused about removing General John Nicholson, the U.S. commander in charge of troops in Afghanistan. I don't think he knows how to win, the president said, impugning Nicholson, who was not present at the meeting. Dunford tried to come to Nicholson's defense, but the mild-mannered general struggled to convey his points to the irascible president. Mr. President, that's just not, Dunford started. We've been under different orders. Dunford sought to explain that he hadn't been charged with annihilating the enemy in Afghanistan, but was instead following a strategy started by the Obama administration to gradually reduce the military presence in the country in hopes of training locals to maintain a stable government so that eventually the United States could pull out. Trump shot back in more plain language. I want to win, he said. We don't win wars anymore. We spend $7 trillion. Everybody else got the oil, and we're not winning anymore. Trump by now was in one of his rages. He was so angry that he wasn't taking many breaths. Ooh, let's do that. All morning he had been coarse and cavalier, but the next several things he bellowed went beyond that description. They stunned nearly everyone in the room, and some vowed that they would never repeat them. Indeed, they have not been reported until now. God damn it. Anyway, should we say it? Let's find out what the big payoff here. I wouldn't go to war with you people, Trump told the assembled brass. He wouldn't go to war with anybody. Addressing the room, the commander-in-chief barked, "You're a bunch of dopes and babies." It's like one of those things where you just, I guess I'm having sympathy for military coups around the world. Imagine that your guy yells, "You're all a bunch of dopes and babies." You know what? Let's just kill them. Well, we don't do that in this country, whatever. But now we're talking about, why hasn't this been done as a downfall parody? Isn't that basically what Hitler was doing at that time? Anyway, for a president known for verbiage he euphemistically called locker room talk, this was the gravest insult he could have delivered to these people in this sacred space. The flag officers in the room were shocked. Yeah, but so what? What did they do about it? Nothing. Some staff began looking down at their papers, rearranging folders, almost wishing themselves out of the room. A few considered walking out. They tried not to reveal their revulsion on their faces, but questions raced through their minds. How does the commander-in-chief say that? One thought. What would our worst adversaries think if they knew he said this? They would think we suck and that we could be taken advantage of. Which is true. Because why otherwise are we sucking up to North Korea and Russia and worse? I don't know. I guess probably because of exactly that. This was the president who had been labeled a draft dodger for avoiding service in the Vietnam War under questionable circumstances. Trump was a young man born of privilege and seemingly perfect health. You know all about this. All right, so they're like, oh, you're even a draft dodger on top of all this, and you're telling us we're a bunch of babies and losers, and why are we? But why are you sitting there and taking it if you're not a bunch of babies? Maybe he's right to a certain extent. Yeah, I don't know. You're all just sitting there like there's nothing we can do. Sorry. Maybe you are a bunch of babies and losers. Tillerson in particular was stunned by Trump's diatribe and began visibly seething. For too many minutes, others in the room noticed he had been staring straight, dumbfounded, at Mattis, who was speechless with his head bowed down toward the table. Tillerson thought to himself, gosh darn it, Jim. Can you imagine? Gosh darn it. Dag nabbit, Jim. Say something. Why aren't you saying something? Hero of the Republic, Jim Mattis, everybody. But, as he would later tell close aides, Tillerson realized in that moment that Mattis was genetically a Marine, unable to talk back to his commander-in-chief, no matter what nonsense came out of his mouth. Oh, well, we're all poorly served by the adult in the room who turns out to be the biggest baby in the room. I mean, I hate to admit it after all of this. I mean, I think I wanted the outcome of this to be, God, Trump is a goddamn idiot, and everyone can see it. This is my first moment of sympathy with the MAGA crowd, I guess. I ain't joining, but is he wrong? You know, the toughest Marine ever, mad dog. He's the adult in the room, and he's going to... And he sits there, and it's his very virtuism. Now, this is just their opinion on it, I guess. Their read of the situation. Maybe they're wrong. But all of his value came from his being a Marine and a straight talking, no nonsense Marine general, tough guy, mad dog. And as it turns out, the upshot of his Marine background is that he just sits there and takes it. Now, I guess the value of a Marine is that there are some people from whom they'll sit there and take this kind of nonsense, let's say, and others from whom they'll take none. The enemy. That guy, don't take any of his nonsense. This guy, take all the nonsense. And I mean, I guess there's no avoiding that in military training. But I don't know. I guess this is the ultimate answer to one of the conundrums, one of the true paradoxes of the system we've set up for ourselves, is that we tell ourselves, well, first of all, as good soldiers, they're trained to obey all orders and not to question. Ours is not to, what is it? Ours is not to reason why or question why. Ours is not to reason why. Ours is just but to do and die. I'm just borrowing it. My huge knowledge of Charge of the Light Brigade comes from watching The Blind Side, by the way. Not an English major. But you get the idea. I had heard of it before, of course, but now when I hear this now, I picture the two of them discussing it in the movie. Anyhow, the big paradox here of a well-trained army or armed forces officer bowing to the chain of command. But of course, this is all part of the design is that we have a sane and capable commander, or at least sane and capable people around him. He's not so nutty that he can't be contained by helpful aides around him, and this we do not have in this situation. But we're also always, this is the way we comfort ourselves with these things. Well, don't worry about it, because if it's illegal, if they are illegal orders, then they're trained. You can't execute an illegal order. You have to stand up and you would relieve him of command, or you would refuse to execute the order because Geneva Conventions and training. And as it turns out, in the real practical world, when push comes to shove, they look at the table and they do nothing. So what does that mean? Our training isn't good enough. There is no international order for the Geneva Convention. A little bit of both. I think it's a little bit of both. You don't see the Geneva Convention enforced against the big guys, us, right? So I don't know. It's a little disturbing. So okay. So there's Tillerson, by the way. Interesting too. Come on, gosh darn it, Jim, say something. Why aren't you saying something? Why aren't you saying something? Well, you were counting on Mattis to say something. I understand that. He's the military guy after all. Well, he's not saying anything. So what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to quit and say I always thought he was dumb. And what else are they going to do? Are they going to assassinate him? No, you can't ask him to do that either. But I don't know, something other than this, maybe at some point might have been helpful. But, I say that I want this to be the case. But would I have been able to do it? I don't know. It's a tough question. You see, these tough guys can't do it. Anyway, later he would tell close aides, Tillerson realized that in that moment that Mattis was genetically a Marine, unable to talk back to his commander-in-chief no matter what nonsense came out of his mouth. The more perplexing silence was from Pence. That's not perplexing. He's a moron, too. A leader who should have been able to stand up to Trump. Joking. That's why he's VP. He's the most pathetic choice he could have made. Instead, one attendee thought he's sitting there frozen like a statue, which is how I imagine This is how he spends most of his day under normal circumstances. You're surprised that he's doing so in an emergency. He's sitting there frozen like a statue. Why doesn't he stop the president? Another recalled the vice president was a wax museum guy. From the start of the meeting, Pence looked as if he wanted to escape and put an end to the president's torrent. Surely he disagreed with Trump's characterization of military leaders as dopes and babies, although maybe now he agrees, like I do, considering his son Michael was a Marine first lieutenant, then training for his naval aviator wings. But some surmised Pence feared getting crosswise with Trump. A total deer in the headlights, recalled the third attendee. But they all were. And I guess to some extent we all are here. I mean, we read all this stuff in the newspaper and then go, God, somebody's got to put a stop to this. I'll donate to the resistance and then see what's on TV. I'm not saying I'm doing different. I told you every day. I watch something on TV. I watched Clueless. Did that help? No. We're all frozen. I mean, I guess we're all back to the same. We could probably stop with this at this point. But we're all back to the same problem we always have, is that the instinct to normalize or to just say this isn't happening, oh my God, is so overwhelming that we sit here, even with an impeachment ongoing, and say, this can't really be true, and blame everybody else. Why didn't you tell us earlier? You wrote it in a book so you could make money. Yeah, well, suppose I had told you right then and there. I mean, I think what this whole episode is telling us is we would have sat there doing nothing just the same. So maybe it makes no difference. I don't know. I'm learning a lot. Everything's a gray area. There's overlap with everything, and you can see everything any way you want to if you squint at it just right, I guess. So here we say, this is like I said, my first sympathy for Trump supporters is Trump so dumb, so disrespectful, so incompetent that he can't bring himself to understand things like the rest of us do at an adult level? Or is he crazy like a fox and in fact such a genius that he's the first one to see through all of this and say, even your top military brass are chickens, dopes, and babies. The greatest military in the world. Watch this. F you! Stick it up your ass! You all suck! You're losers! F yourselves! Get out of my sight! You suck at what you do. I could do what you do better than you. You're the worst in the world. You're losers. Why do you lose all these wars? Why, that's outrageous. You can't speak to America's military in that fashion. Are you kidding me? I've been doing this since the start. At the Republican National Convention, I told America point blank to its face, F Gold Star families if they're brown. Screw them. I told you before I even got to that you told me I was politically dead because I said to you, I prefer people who weren't captured. I took a POW American war hero sitting senator and I told him, you suck. You're the worst. You lost the war that I wouldn't even fight in. I was dodging it. You were a POW? I'm supposed to respect that? F yourself. Don't be a POW if you're a real soldier. That's what he told him. And we all said, oh my God, that can't be right. And at that point, he was just a candidate for the nomination. Not only did that not kill him, he won the nomination. Not only did that not kill him, he won the presidency. Not only did that not kill him, it made him the only person in the world capable of saying this stuff to the top brass of the United States military and having them say, maybe he's right. I might have to sit here and listen to this. Because after all, he's the president. He's the commander-in-chief of the United States Armed Forces. And I can't do anything about it because that's what I've been trained to do. We talk about how he's hacked the media system. He's hacked everything. He found out how to go to, I guess, what we've been trained to, the most honorable, the toughest, the best trained, the most professional people that the United States of America has to offer in any capacity, any job. You got to hire a veteran for anything because you can make them a senator or a congressman because they know, they're trained, they defend America, they love America, they stand up for our principles. Oh yeah, watch this. F you! Your principles are bull crap. I wish I'd really just be screaming. At this point, I should just be cursing, right? There's no restrictions on it, but I don't know. I'm too well trained, you see? Just like the Marines. I'm exactly like me not saying the 7 dirty words or whatever and a podcast that nobody cares about is just like being a Marine. But I mean, I guess I'm still dumbfounded by this. Is he wrong? Yeah, I think. But has he hacked the system? Is it just that he's too dumb for the system? We don't know what to do with something this dumb? He purports to be president of the United States. The Electoral College said that he should be able to. I mean, I don't know what better situation there is. And I guess maybe this is it. I guess this is where I jump off of the Barbara Jordan train. And I say, you know what? My faith in the Constitution is incomplete. It's not total. I think it blows. What do you think about that? I'm going to do it. Now I'm Donald Trump. I'm going to hack the system too. The United States and its Constitution is crap. We have nothing underpinning our system of government. It's all an illusion. And all it takes is somebody who's genius enough to destroy. What is it? How did Bannon put it? I forget. Something about disassembling or destroying or smashing the administrative state. And I guess maybe they're all geniuses after all. And they're, whether crazy like a fox or stupid like a fox or whatever. I don't know. What else do you make of it? To be able to walk into the center of Pentagon power as a draft dodger and a well-known idiot and liar and tell them to their face, F you, you're all wrong and there's nothing you can do about it. Plus, on top of which, I made America make me its president despite losing by almost 5 million votes. And possibly cheating along the way and using the Russians to do it, and you're all still obeying me. How about that? I mean, I don't know. I guess at the end of the day, I would say, you know what? I would love to lay it out to them that way. Let me reassemble all the players in this, and let me put it to you this way, and then say, now tell me, who's the idiot in all of this? Is it you? Or is it him? Did he not get you to go along? Are the people who planned this intervention not all gone from government? If you tried to order something to happen in the government, what would happen? Nothing. If he tries to order it and it's ridiculous, they'll still do it because the Electoral College, I think. And I guess I'll just exit from this saying one more time, if you are shocked at all, and I don't know how many people are shocked by this at this point, with my saying, all right, you know what? I have no faith in the Constitution. It's a crap document. It's worthless. Am I a podcast shock jock now? Or is it basically what I've been saying all along now that I think about it? Like thinking about how much rides on the Electoral College and what a poor design. We were told forever, always told, always trained like the Marines. Well, this is what's going to save us from, the small state thing obviously never worked out. And the small state thing is a horrible embarrassment because now we're, of course, sitting in a situation where, anything, whether in the middle of our impeachment, which won't remove him from office because of the weird imbalance of power that we have in the Senate, or passing legislation. I mean, we're constantly being told, what is it, like 7% of the population controls 51 votes in the Senate, the way we've apportioned things. And that, is the same basis on which we've apportioned the Electoral College. But on top of all this, why the anti-democratic institution of the Electoral College? Why can't we simply just vote directly for president and have the popular vote determine who the president is going to be? Because we have to have the Electoral College, because what if a demagogue were to become popularly elected? It would be up to the Electoral College to stand up to this demagogue and prevent him from becoming president because he would be such a danger to the United States and our constitutional form of government. Only they didn't do that. And it was as plain as day. But not only did they not do it because they were afraid, because they had been trained like the Marines and like the rest of us, that no, we count our votes here and we do it right. Nobody breaks into voting machines and changes the totals, even though they keep coming up with more and more supposed evidence. I don't even know whether I believe it still that they're changing those things. But on top of all of that, we took away the power of our electoral college, fine, upstanding individuals to change the outcome. We took it away legislatively, and maybe for good reason, because we don't have honorable people necessarily there anymore either. Hi everybody, it's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Gosh, it feels good to be back. It really doesn't, of course. While we were away, I happened to notice the news that Trump is expected to add Ken Starr and Alan Dershowitz to his impeachment defense team, according to the reporting at CNN. Let me just pocket that so I can put it away for you. I mean, that's all there is. There's more verbiage to it, but what more news do you really want to squeeze out of that? I was laughing on it about it during the break. Just another one of those instances that Trump is the Daniel Snyder of presidents. If you're not familiar with him, the owner of the Washington Breadsticks football team, who notoriously, especially in his early tenure as owner, would overrule the football operations guys on questions of signing free agents or making selections at the draft. And he was very widely derided. I didn't care because I hate the team, but I loved it. I thought it was great. I always said the best thing that could happen to my favored team, the Giants, was that Daniel Snyder continued to own the Breadsticks forever and turn them into garbage. But he was notorious for being like a sports talk radio fanboy kind of a guy who happened to get a hold of enough money to buy the team. And I guess the most egregious example of this for the team was in his taking over as owner and trying to build, he's trying to build himself a championship team, but he's up against like actual professional football people who know what they're doing at the other 20-something teams in the league. And so he's looking over the, I guess, list of available free agents. And the thing that struck me clearest about all this was when he said, I'll spend whatever it takes and sign Deion Sanders, who was really, I think at that point had been released by everybody. He had been a flashy and interesting player, and I don't know if I'm qualified to pass on whether or not he was really truly a good or even great player. He certainly made a name for himself, and that's the sort of thing that struck everybody, was that he went for the flash and who had a big name and who was likely to have convinced ordinary, semi-dedicated sports fans who listen to sports talk radio all the time that they're great, the people who get mentioned all the time. So, I mean, he blew a tremendous amount of money on Deion Sanders, who made a negligible impact on the team. He played competently, but he wasn't supposed to be a franchise player. And then, of course, other selections and draft things and the trade deals that he made in the draft in order to draft quarterbacks that didn't work out. Was it the team traded away a huge amount of draft power in order to be able to draft I can't even remember. I just remember the nickname, RG3. What was it? Robert Griffin? Was that his name? It was a good athlete, fine quarterback, questionable about whether or not he fit into the system that they had there, all that's for the football experts. But, anybody played him to death and was just like, you're in, kid, take the ball, go win. And, and he didn't have time to learn to be a professional football player versus a college football player. And it's, by all accounts, an extraordinarily different level of the game. And he played it like the only thing he knew, which was at that point college ball, and he got pummeled and injured, and they ruined the asset, is what I guess I would say. Anyway, not directly applicable to the impeachment defense situation, although I really hope that they tackle and pummel the defense team. They really ought to. I mean, I don't know. At this point, let's say I advocate a coup against the government of the United States insofar as it's Donald Trump who's able to constitute it. And I have no basis for it, and I offer no basis for it better than the fact that I think he's a moron, and I think almost anybody else would be better. Ordinarily, that wouldn't pass muster, but we live in extraordinary times. There, the end. The evidence I offer you for this is everything from the last 3 years, and I'm totally wrong. And you should not listen to me. And I'm not serious about it, and I'm leading no effort to actually take action on it. But at some point, I don't know what else to tell you. You know what? We've normalized our way into too much here. All right, let me stop with this excerpt from the book. This is getting me into trouble, obviously. And we'll talk about some of the other things that I've put aside as semi-interesting compared to something like this. One, news comes that we have another episode of How to Interpret a Trump or Trumpster comment on our hands. We were told, there's an explanation for this one, I think. But we were told that the missile strike, I love that pronunciation of it, missile strike, against the joint U.S.-Iraqi base at Al-Assad in Iraq the other day, in retaliation for the assassination of General Soleimani, you all remember the incident we're talking about now, resulted in no casualties among American troops. Right? Who told us that? Trump government. So how do you read a Trump government comment? There must have been casualties. And in fact, there were, as it turns out. There were no American casualties or no American injuries. Yes, there were. 11 U.S. troops were injured in the January 8th Iranian missile strike. But there's a defensible explanation to it. It just doesn't look good. So, troops have been hurt, so we have to make mention of it. Defense One is the source of the first write-up I saw on it. It's been covered many other places now, but here's the deal. Why did the government lie to us about there being injuries at the strike? And the answer is, I don't know that they did. It sounds like what happened was nobody was injured by shrapnel or the explosion or falling or flying debris, as is usually the case when troops are targeted with exploding ordnance. But instead, I guess there were percussive effects. Concussion injuries, essentially, is what happened. And, with concussion injuries, they don't often manifest right away. Something explodes, a missile, 10, 12, 16 of them, whatever the number was. You look around. Is anybody hurt? And really what you're looking for is, are you bleeding? Have you been blown apart? Are you dead? No? Okay. Anybody wounded by flying anything? Need a Band-Aid? Anything? No? All right. Well, then I guess nobody was wounded by this. And in the days ensuing, you have people then come to the medical officers and saying, I got headaches, I can't sleep, whatever, my ears are ringing. And you say, you know what? You have a concussion. You may have been close enough to the explosions. You got percussive concussion injuries. And now that we know what we know about concussions. In the old days, we'd say, walk it off, get back in the game, whatever it is. And now we say, no, there's actual real problems with that. And you should go through the concussion protocols, and we should treat you for traumatic brain injury, just to be sure, because why not? We want our troops to be healthy. This was the right thing to do. And so, okay. The word is that a couple days after, why don't we just read this? Nearly 12 American troops were wounded. That's true. In Iran's January 8th missile attack on Iraq's Al-Assad airbase. This week, they were medically evacuated to the U.S. military hospitals in Kuwait and Landstuhl, Germany, to be treated for traumatic brain injury, which sounds terrible. But in fact, they're just saying, okay, well, you might have had a concussion. And to undergo further evaluation, several U.S. defense and military officials have confirmed to Defense One. Senior military and Trump administration officials had said on January 8th that 11 Iranian missiles had caused no casualties, no friendly casualties, whether they are U.S., coalition, contractor, etc. In the past week, news organizations were granted access to the base to film the damage and interview military personnel, and they have reported that no Americans were killed, wounded, or seriously injured. But the New York Times reported on Monday that some personnel had been treated for concussions. In a January 16th statement, a spokesman for the U.S. military command in Baghdad said, as previously stated, while no U.S. service members were killed in the January 8th Iranian attack, several were treated for concussion symptoms from the blast and are still being assessed. Out of an abundance of caution, some service members were transported from Al-Assad Air Base, Iraq, to Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany. Others were sent to Camp Arifjan, maybe, in Kuwait for follow-on screening, according to Colonel Miles Kaggins, spokesman for the Combined Joint Task Force Operation Inherent Resolve. When deemed fit for duty, the service members are expected to return to Iraq following screening. The health and welfare of our personnel is a top priority, and we will not discuss any individual's medical status. Goes on from there, but suffice to say, okay, I get that as a possibility. And I don't know that I would have reported any different initially either. But there you go. I just found that interesting, and we have to note that and take stock of where we are on all this. What's this? Mighty OCD has a comment here. They were just scared the feral Trump rally rabid GOP base would start screaming for a counterattack. This is another, yes, good, a theory that I saw floated last night when we found out about this. They were scared that Trumpsters would say, U.S. troops were injured, we got to murder every Iranian right away. And it was best to tell both the American people and our so-called commander-in-chief that everything was fine so that they could then de-escalate. That's true. In fact, let's finish his comment here. So they were afraid to tell everybody. They would scream for a counterattack, and they knew they'd forget in a couple of days when something else shiny caught their attention. And it's a good theory. I think it's entirely possible that they may have done things that way. But I think it's also entirely possible that they may have said, yeah, I looked around and nobody needed so much as a Band-Aid. And I said, is everybody okay? And they said, yes. And I believed them because of what an idiot I am, and I normalize everything. Are you okay? Yes, I'm fine. Are you sure? Because 11 Iranian missiles just exploded here. I'm telling you I'm fine. Well, I'm going to have to take your word for it. Or do I say, no, I'm staging a coup and I'm relieving you of your duty here at the airbase because you say you're okay, but I know that there could be percussive injuries, and in about 4 days, you're going to have a terrible headache. So, it would have been good medical policy. I don't know that I would have objected to all of that. But I'm saying there may not have necessarily been a grand scheme to tamp down on things. They looked around and they thought everybody was okay. And what are you going to tell the president? Well, they all look okay, but in a couple days, some of them may have headaches. You can't tell this president that. I mean, not that it would have sparked a reaction to him. He probably would have, I don't know what he would have done. He would have said, oh, a bunch of babies and losers with their headaches. He might have done nothing with it. Anyway, it's explicable, and that's the way it is. But, am I wrong? Is this not how to read a Trump comment? The answer is they gave the answer too soon. And traumatic brain injury should be on all of our minds. You shouldn't have traumatic brain injury actually literally on your brain. But we should be thinking about it is what I'm saying. I'm wishing you all a concussion for the weekend accidentally here. All right. Considerably less important news, but still something that you might actually want to talk about over the weekend. Matt Gaetz is a pervert. How do you like that? Can we just say that outright? It might be the case that we're not allowed to say that outright. So we should acknowledge that. Allegedly, we're not allowed to say that Matt Gaetz is a pervert. I'm not certain why that is, but you could get yourself in trouble somehow. U.S. Representative Matt Gaetz, though, it says right here in this headline, I'm just telling you what Orlando Weekly says. U.S. Representative Matt Gaetz accused of creating sex game with points for sleeping with staff, says these guys at Orlando Weekly. Solomon Gustavo, as a matter of fact, is the one who is charged with the responsibility for saying this. This is a rumor I heard floated earlier in the week that someone who had served with Gaetz in the Florida state legislature said, yeah, this is what he did while he was here. And I will just say at the outright, guilty, and we should execute him. Or I will say, I believe that he might be telling the truth about that. And then we'll let the chips fall where they may. We don't immediately have to execute him for this, and that's not even in the offing. What are you talking about out there? Calm down. In a Twitter clapback for the Capitol Hill ages, fire this writer, Florida State Representative Chris Latvala, I'm guessing, Latvala, accused Florida Congressional Representative Matt Gaetz of designing a, quote, game with a point system for, quote, sleeping with aides, interns, lobbyists, and married legislators. The social media spat started with Gaetz firing the opening shots and Latvala lobbing a missile, here we are again, of an accusation in retort. It began with a generally innocuous tweet from Latvala. I wonder how that's said. On Tuesday, the day before the state legislative session began, I guess he had nothing to do, the Clearwater representative posted a picture of him on January 13th with liberal and political icon Al Sharpton, writing, "It was an honor to meet," and then tagging him in Twitter, at the Rev Al today. So that's how this whole thing started. Oh my God, he met Reverend Al Sharpton and said it was an honor, and Gaetz decided he had to say something. Gaetz, who's in D.C. to cape for Donald Trump, in case you want to know where the Orlando Weekly comes down, to cape for Donald Trump in the impeachment trials, responded by saying that Sharpton had called cops pigs on their coffees, I guess, called whites interlopers, Greeks homos, as Gaetz put it, and Jews diamond merchants. So that is pretty disgusting. Gaetz capped the tweet. Well, not long after Gaetz could have fist-pumped a whispered, "got him," Latvala was on the offensive, firing off the sex game accusation. It seems like things escalated quickly, don't you? The last mention of the sex game came in 2013 from then Miami Herald reporter Mark Caputo on, where else? Twitter, where he said a source informed him of a game played by young male state reps. The point system for the game, which was rumored to continue in 2014 and 15, demeaningly awarded 1 point for having sex with a lobbyist, 2 for a staffer, 3 for another legislator, and 6 for a married legislator. Gaetz told the Tampa Bay Times he denies creating, having knowledge of, or participating in the game. The Twitter barbs did not stop with the accusation. Gaetz's response aimed past Latvala and hit his father, Senator Jack Latvala, who resigned from office while under investigation for groping an aide. "Just because I own you on Twitter, don't confuse me for your daddy when it comes to abusing power for sex," said Gaetz on Twitter, adding that he was still waiting on a defense of Sharpton. He was serious about that. In light of all this, really? Latvala blew past the familial shot to ask Gates if he'd been drinking and suggested the U.S. congressman abstain from drinking and driving, which really is always just good advice, but for him in particular. Gates's father, former Senator Don Gates, F Florida. Can I just put that out there? I mean, it's not different from other states in this respect, but it also has a lot of weirdos and crackheads and losers in it, I think. But what can I tell you? All right, I apologize for that outburst. So, Florida man is a weird thing. And look at this. They both are state reps, and both their dads are state senators. And that happens in a lot of states. And it's not just Florida, but Florida is also very hot. And on top of all of this disgusting nepotism, it's very hot and swampy. Alligators, it's a wreck. Guns, you name it. But wherever this happens, F all of those states. It's in mine too. And in every state I've ever lived in, I'm sure. And where you live as well. All right. Gates's father, former Senator Don Gates, was also a politician. And they also don't like each other. Not Gates and his dad, I'm sure. But, well, maybe they do. I don't know. Their sons have made sure the Gates-Latvala animosity burns on. And that's it. And good. I'm glad that's it because holy crap. But anyway, I just wanted that story out there because Matt Gaetz, I believe that about him. Sure, you bet. He's absolutely that kind of guy. And I know this because I am here watching on Twitter. And I'm as smart as anybody, so what do you say? You just let me have my say. I saw yesterday on Twitter where they were interviewing a local, I guess, potential caucus goer in Iowa. And everybody was shocked, me too, at how disconnected from any sort of political, what we would consider to be sound political logic, some of these voters were. But that's true, of everywhere. People are weird, and they have weird reasons for deciding who they're going to vote for. I don't even have good reasons for deciding who I'm going to vote for, especially in a primary, quite honestly. But this was a bit of a shocker to everyone because they were talking to somebody who was saying that they caucused for Bernie Sanders in 2016. But then when he didn't win the nomination, she went and she was one of the many rumored people. By many, I mean, there's 300 million people in the country. So if, 1,000 of them do it, how many people, how many is many? 1,000 is many, but not compared to the 300 million. But there shouldn't be any, by logic, who say, I'm so left, I love Bernie, but I'm so angry about his not getting the nomination for whatever reason that I'm going to vote as far right as possible. Now, you don't do that. That doesn't make any sense. But people do make that decision, or they get angry for various weird reasons, or sometimes they even think they see similarities. I don't know. They're crazy. But this woman was interesting. So I caucused for Bernie last time, but I voted for Trump. This time, she says, what did she say? I don't know whether she was caucusing for Bernie again or not, but her second choice was this, and maybe that was, she was thinking, considering both Bernie again, which would make sense, and Pete Buttigieg, which really isn't what you would think a normal person who would say, well, if Bernie doesn't make it, or if I had to choose a second or something, or I'm thinking about something different this time, Buttigieg probably wouldn't be it. But, again, who knows? Who can account for any of this stuff? And then maybe if neither of them get it, I'll vote for Trump again. Was just sort of, they're all over the map. And I guess I was entertained by that. I'll have to find that tweet. Note to self, what crazy lady in Iowa, right? And we'll see if we can't find that example for you later on. But I guess I was just struck by that when we try to be all scientific about everything and we do the polling and we need to talk to these persuadable Trump voters about kitchen table issues, bread and butter issues. Unless, of course, as I was tweeting yesterday, they'd rather talk about rubber band and turpentine because, why bother with bread and or butter? I guess ultimately, it's just a percentage game, right? Most people could probably be convinced by traditional arguments. But how do we capture this woman who, you know what? We don't know. But we also don't know how many of them are out there. It's just kind of, I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. I note for the record that person exists and that there might not be any way to understand that or capture it or speak to it in any coherent manner. Okay, what else? A second night of Lev Parnas interviews left us with even more evidence that will be brought to bear, presumably at some point in the impeachment trial, which resumes its activity on Tuesday of next week. The senators are sworn, despite the fact that everybody knew that they were just kidding about the words of the oath, and nothing happened. Lightning didn't strike them. Chief Justice Roberts didn't prevent them from taking the oath or signing the oath book. No Democrats in the Senate asked any members of the Senate to stand aside from taking the oath based on general information and belief that they were entering into the oath dishonestly. And you probably shouldn't really have expected that. We wanted it to happen, but again, like everybody at the table in 2E924 or whatever the number is for the tank over at the Pentagon, everyone was kind of shocked into silence. We've seen it before. I complained about it on Twitter earlier in advance of all of this stuff. They should absolutely have raised that issue and raised that question. I don't know how it would have been resolved. My bet is that it would have been resolved exactly as it was resolved yesterday. It would have been a big waste of time. But I am reminded time and again of, maybe you saw it, the opening scenes of Fahrenheit 9/11, when after the 2000 election, several members of the House, mostly members of the Congressional Black Caucus, and maybe exclusively members of the Congressional Black Caucus, if I recall, but certainly the most prominent members who spoke up about it, hopefully there were more, spoke up and said, look, we got to do something about this. There's all kinds of, every indication that something went terribly wrong with the vote count in Florida. We shouldn't be sitting here counting these electoral votes at this stage of the game. And of course, because he was duty bound and trained like a Marine, Al Gore had instructed everybody, no, we're going to have an orderly transition of power here. And no senators, I hope, will speak up. But as we know, all it would have taken to look into it any further, or even cause them to vote not to look into it any further, would be a senator saying, I believe you. I believe your objection is well-founded. But no senator would do it. And then the same objections were raised after the 2004 election, and again, no senator would do it. And then again, objections were made to the electoral vote count after the 2016 election, when there were open questions about how that came down. And similarly, objections made by the House and stunned silence once again by the Senate. Don't say anything that's going to make us look like not normal. And now here we are again. And now we've gotten it all the way to the point where they all believe that the president ought to be impeached and the trial ought to begin, and they still won't say anything. I mean, is the Senate not convinced? Are Senate Democrats not convinced that there's something extraordinary going on here? They all support the impeachment, right? They must mean something. But no, don't say anything out of the ordinary. Don't be the one that stands out. Don't say anything about what the rest of, even if it's nobody but the Democratic base has been saying about the value of those oaths. But, on the other hand, they're right. They know what's going to come out of it. They know that they're just really not going to entertain that thing. But so what? You know what? Just have some votes. Stand up. Show that they're not going to stand there in stunned silence at the next inflection point, which is right in front of us. The impeachment trial of Donald Trump. But no, they are going to stand in stunned silence, just as the members of the intervention in the tank sat in stunned silence. That's the way it is, I guess, here in America. And I'm going to be sitting in stunned silence for the weekend, even after spending 2 hours here talking to you about how horrible stunned silence is and how I wish some brave people would somehow break out of it. I don't know how. It's very difficult to know what to do that will be effective that won't just get you ostracized as, there goes that crazy guy again, speaking about how we shouldn't be stunned into silence. That's so crazy. You can see that the respected leaders of America are constantly sitting in stunned silence, except, of course, for the ones from the Republican Party who say, I can demand and win anything I want because I know that the rest of them are going to sit there in stunned silence. And if any of them speak up, I'm going to yell so loud that they go back into the stunned silence. And they're going to say I'm an idiot and I'm a moron and I don't know how to get anything done, but I'm getting everything I want. Maybe, I think, or, maybe you have to be special brand of stupid to be Donald Trump and say, I'm winning, I'm getting the things I want, because people refuse to execute your orders. I don't know. It's a mixed up, crazy world out there, and we'll be back on Monday to discuss it. Despite the fact that it's a federal holiday, it might be important to catch up at that point, and if there's anything that happens between now and then that Justice Putnam didn't tell you, then we're going to get a chance to make up for our obsessions come Monday. Do stay tuned, because he's coming up next.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
All right, so stay tuned for Justice Putnam coming up next. Of course, all sorts of information to be found in the impeachment front. And if you want some assurance that some people somewhere in the world don't always sit by in stunned silence in every situation, stay tuned for the international news. See what he's got for you next.